Sewing of an ordinary petticoat. In the previous session, we cut the fabric pieces for an ordinary petticoat. We'll now see how to sew the fabric pieces together. We'll first sew the shoulder seams, then the neck opening, armholes, gathers for the skirt, side seams, and the bottom hem of the ordinary petticoat. At the end of the session, you will be able to sew the fabric pieces together of an ordinary petticoat. Let's first familiarize with the tools and materials required for sewing an ordinary petticoat. They are cut-out fabric pieces, matching thread, sewing machine, a pair of small scissors, contrasting thread, needle, and measuring tape. Like we did for A-cut petticoat, we will first sew the shoulder seams together. For that, open the front and back bodies and keep the front bodies over the back bodies with the right sides inside. And we will sew the shoulder seams with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, starting and ending with a reverse stitch. We will now sew a narrow double-folded hem for the neck opening. For that, first press the shoulder seam allowances open. Starting from one shoulder seam, fold the cut edge of the neck opening 1/8 inch over to the wrong side of the fabric and stitch it down. Keep folding the cut edge 1/8 inch all around the neck opening and stitch it down till the starting point. Then again fold the folded edge over all around the neck opening and stitch next to the folded edge till the starting point. Thus we have completed the sewing of neck opening. Now let's see how to sew the narrow double-folded hem for armhole. Starting from one side of the armhole, fold the cut edge 1/8 inch over to the wrong side of the fabric and stitch it down. Take the second armhole and fold the cut edge 1/8 inch over to the wrong side and stitch down. Again, fold the folded edge all around the armhole and stitch it down. Repeat the same for the other armhole also. Now let's see how to sew the gathers for the skirt pieces. For that, change the thread on your machine to a different color and change the stitching length to the longest stitch possible. We change to a colored thread so that later it is easier to remove the longer stitches after the gathers are sewn down. First, fold the skirt pieces in half and cut a little notch at the fold to indicate the center. Repeat the same for the other piece too. Along the long cut edge of the skirt parts, sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and leave some long threads at the beginning and at the end. Then sew a second row 3 by 8 inch parallel to the first one and leave some long threads at the beginning and at the end. Knot the long threads on each side of the skirt pieces together. At the center point notch, pull the thread of the two stitched lines holding the fabric down. Now you could see how the fabric gathers. Place the front and back bodies on the table. Keep pulling until the waistline of the skirt and the waistline of the front and the back bodies have the same length. Note the long threads at the center to secure the gathers and distribute them evenly along the waistline. Repeat the same for the other skirt piece also. Again, change the thread to white and to a smaller stitch length. Then place the gathered waistline of the skirt piece over the right side of the front bodice piece and sew it between the two colored stitching lines to keep the gathers fixed with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Repeat the same to the back bodies also. Now we remove the colored stitches by cutting off the knots at the sides and pulling on the knots in the center. Also remove the loose thread on the other side. Turn the petticoat such that the right sides face each other and open the seam at the waist. Top stitch the seam allowance facing to the bodice next to the previous seam. Turn it again to the wrong side and align the side seams. Thus we have finished making the gathers. Now let's see how to sew the side seams. Turn the petticoat again to the wrong side and align the side seams. Then sew along the side seams with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, starting and ending with a reverse stitch. Should be careful at the point where the front waistline and the back waistline meet. They should be at the same height. Repeat the same for the other side seam also. Sew a second row of stitches 1/8 inch within the seam allowance and start and end with a reverse stitch. Thus, we have finished sewing the side seams. Now, we will see how to sew the bottom hem. At the bottom of the petticoat, fold the cut edge 1 inch to the wrong side and press it flat all around the bottom, keeping the side seam allowances towards the back. Fold 1 inch over again for the second time. Starting with a reverse stitch, sew one side seam next to the first fold and end with a reverse stitch. Now let's turn the ordinary petticoat to the right side and iron it nicely. And now our ordinary petticoat is ready. It is very important to verify the various aspects of quality of the finished product. So, let's do a quality check to ensure that our product is of good quality. Check if the narrow double-folded hem at the neck opening is smooth and even and top stitch is neatly done. Check if the front length is 11.5 inches. Check if the chest is 14 inches, that is 12 inch plus ease. Check if the gathers are arranged evenly. Check if the total length of the petticoat matches with the measurements taken. Check if the bottom hem is 1 inch. Check if two lines of the stitches at the side seam are parallel and the seam allowances are even. In this session, we have learned how to sew the fabric pieces together for an ordinary petticoat. Before we conclude, let's take a look at the key points involved in sewing an ordinary petticoat. Step 1. Sew the shoulder seams. Step 2. Sew a narrow double-folded hem for the neck opening. Step 3. Sew a narrow double-folded hem for the armholes. Step 4. Sew the gathers for the skirt pieces. Step 5. Sew the side seams. Step 6. Sew the bottom hem. Step 7. Check the quality of the finished product. With that, we have come to the end of the session.